stuff in my office. You don't know what
What
that
is
was?
it?
I don't know what it is.
Okay, oh, okay. Well, we're waiting on Mike Padilla to get here.
Oh, he's on.
He's on
He's
there.
waiting for you.
I'm waiting on Mr. Padilla to get to work. Okay, are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the November 30th, 3 o'clock Special Committee Police and Community Meeting. I'd like to welcome you. I'd ask for my colleagues to introduce themselves if they would.
Karen Hiller, District 1. We can't hear you.
Mike, if you can hear us, we can't hear you.
Looks like he's unmuted.
Can somebody else say
Yeah, District 5, can you hear me now?
There you are.
Okay.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, Mike Padilla, District 5. Sorry, my audio is cutting in and out.
Okay, that means you need to get checked. We're gonna have to call Cox and have you checked out there. I'd like to welcome everybody else that's also online. Okay, if we can, approval of the minutes from November 9th. Mike and Karen, what is your pleasure?
Move to
I would move to approve.
Oh, second.
Okay, it's been moved and approved. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, that's 3-0. Is Liz on as well?
She's getting there.
She said she was gonna be jumping on in a minute. Okay, that's 3-0. Okay. Input from presenters on cultural awareness training. I think that is, there you go. I'm trying to get your name here with my mind, trying to get my mind going here. Mr.
Davis.
Davis, that's right. Kane Davis, there you go. I was thinking Sugar Cane, but I knew that wasn't right.
Oh,
Mr. Davis, you want to start out?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not necessarily sure what you would like, but I have been responsible for providing training to the police department in this particular area.
Hold on, Mr. Davis, just a second, please. We can barely hear you. So we're trying to figure out what's going on here. Did you find me any pens, Chief? You didn't find no pens for me?
Did I give you a pen?
Remember I told you I lost, somebody stole them from me. You said you'd see if you had any more. You're forgetting, boy.
I gave you one. That's fine where I put it.
Okay, let's try again. Let's do a test, Mr. Davis.
All right, can you hear me now?
Oh, better.
yes, absolutely. Okay,
Thanks for allowing me to share with you what we've done, and I'm quite frankly not sure exactly what you wanted from me. I just understood you wanted to talk to someone who had been conducting training for the police department, and I'm prepared to provide you whatever information you're interested in hearing.
did you have a presentation for us on training?
I can provide one if that's what you would like. How long do you want it to be?
How long do you have one prepared now?
Oh, this is what I do for a living. I can.
Yeah, okay. Probably about 30 minutes, 40 minutes.
Okay.
And we can go from there, is that okay, Karen?
Do we have other presenters or just Mr. Davis today?
I think just Mr. Davis.
Okay. Well, we might want to tell him why we wanted him to do the presentation so that,
I thought he was aware of that. You are aware of that, right? Why we wanted you to do that?
No, I was contacted via email and told that I was supposed to, that you all wanted to talk to the person who provides the training to the police department. And this is something I do on a regular basis, so I'm prepared to do whatever you like me to do. I
Okay.
did read some notes from the minutes. And at the end of those minutes, it said you'd like to have discussion with the person who provides the training to PPD. And that's why I would contact you.
I think the idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike or Sylvia, was that the department has shared with us their training outlines and the personnel who deliver the curriculum that they have. That council was interested in being, having a little breadth to that discussion in terms of the fact that the outside speakers, trainers had been brought in for cultural awareness, and so wanted to be able to have you share not just with us, but with others that would watch the video or that are watching today, to give us an idea of how you present. So on the assumption that it's a little different angle, a little broader, you might also have some feedback for us in terms of your interaction with the trainees in the classes and how it seems to make a difference, if it does, that sort of thing.
Okay, that would be fine. If you would allow me to, what I like to do is just pull up a slide presentation of what I have provided police officers. And I won't go into that for the detail, but you can see the slides, and I will highlight a couple of those slides to give you a favor of what the discussion is and why I chose those particular slides. Would that be permissible?
Yes.
I think it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, take your time.
I've already pulled it up during our discussion, so now all I have to do is see, can I share it with you? Can you all see it at this point?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll start at the top. These are the two presenters. We're both International Association Directors for Law Enforcement Standards and Training certified. We're both EEOC certified. And I myself, I have over 30 years of doing this type of work as it relates to cultural competency, EEO diversity. I've worked as either a professional or as the executive in charge at the city, state, federal government level, U.S. military, and in the private sector. So I've had experience of doing this for 30 years, leading organizations in multiple states that's responsible for cultural diversity and EEO type activity. Before we give any presentation, we actually like to go look and research the organization we are doing. So unless a company or an organization asks us for boilerplate information, we will reach out to that organization and say, tell us something about your organization. Give us some data so that we can utilize that and kind of, when we're discussing with the class, a couple of things for us. One, it kind of level sets us as to what the organization is. But more importantly, as we're given the training, it gives us some things to operate within as we're communicating with those employees. And this is basically our first slide that we would go over this kind of level. And here, we like to level set just simply because issues such as cultural competency, individuals have different definitions of things. Something as simple as what is a stereotype, or what is sex? How do you define it? So we kind of look at the things for this particular presentation, and we give a definition so that when we are communicating and talking about something, we are hoping that the class understands whatever definition we have defined previously. That's the definition. We also talk a little bit about police history because it is very important to know how law enforcement have gotten to the point that we see law enforcement and police community relations playing a role today. It didn't just start last year, it didn't start a decade ago, it started a long time ago. And we'd like for police officers to know that there is a long history, and educating them on that history and the perceptions behind it. As I stated earlier, we really look at the particular organization, we look at their culture, we look at their mission. This is just a typical question that we ask employees just to get their feedback on. We try to encourage them that, you know what, this is not something we're asking you to do. We believe that these are things that are just another tool in your tool belt. These are things that are just common courtesy and respect, and we're trying to convey that to these individuals. This is something our firm created, and it's just really what we call the cycle of culture, or cultural cycle. And it just basically talks about how, you know, you can start from a very destructive phase, and instead of me going through that, I'll click on some slides so you will see that, and you won't have to try to follow me as much. But here, the destructive phase, many times people do things when they don't even know they're doing it. And what I've done here is we've given them some examples. The top example is when people really know they're being blatant about their acts, they are really intending on violating someone's culture. And the second part of that is they don't know that they are doing it, but they are sitting in positions of power and can affect those individuals in a significant way. And sometimes people get cultural blindness confused with the unknowingly process. And for me, the cultural blindness comes in where you don't have as much power. As you can see here, like one of the things a lot of people like to say, well, I don't see color. Well, I'm a dark-skinned black male. If you can't see the difference between me and Marilyn Monroe, then you probably need to go see a physician or an eye doctor or something. So just knowing that when you say that to someone of color, regardless of what your intent is, it's really conveying something else to them. Making negative comments. And then there's some common things, actions under this actions bug here. And we talk about others, but these are just three of the examples of things that I think happen on a regular basis that sometimes people really do not see it potentially culturally affecting individuals. And then just cultural awareness, that's basically when people are now becoming aware, man. And this is one of those things that I think is just a beautiful light when you encounter someone who realize, you know what, I didn't know that. I've been doing this and now I'm going to change because I've been educated, I've been enlightened. These are just some good things. Cultural sensitivity, now you know, you're aware, now you're actually doing some things in your personal life to change how you have been interacting with people. The cultural competence, this is when people, it's really clicking for people. They know that they are doing a good thing. They really have not just become aware, they're not just sensitive, but they are actually making big differences in their lives. It's creating some positive things in their work environment as a police officer. To start creating how you are thinking now that you are encountering someone who may be low income, they may be a female, they may be from a different ethnic background, but now you are aware and you are being very sensitive to those issues when you're encountering these citizens. And then that cultural humility. A lot of people think they've mastered it. I can tell you, someone who's been responsible for this over 30 years, who always encounter things that make you think, how did I miss that? Or I didn't know that. And this is just one of those things where we want to be aware that we haven't mastered this because things change. If you look, for example, 20 years ago, if someone was gay, they really had to hide it in our society. They wanted to have a promotion in our society. The culture changes, social expectation changes, and what comes with that is us always being willing to change and be aware. Here's our definition of a cultural competent employee. And we actually believe that individuals will actively do these things. They are aware of not just what someone else's cultural backgrounds and biases are, but what are yours? What are some of the things that's causing you to stumble as you engage people from different cultures and backgrounds? This is just a video that we show. We have a lot of interactive things, and this is just a video basically of a young Hispanic police officer. She's encountering, she's working in a school environment, and she starts speaking signs with the individuals who need sign language communications, and then just hearing how those individuals who use sign language talked about, you know, this person really showed me they cared. They learned the language. They invested in me by learning this language, and just how it changes people's life when they know you're being sensitive to whatever their particular background is. Here's our definition of stereotype. I think you can have your own definition of stereotype, and here is just one of those situations where we try to define what we think is stereotype for the particular training we're given. We talk about some of the negative stereotypes, some of the things that happened that brought these things about, and we go through all of this stuff in as much detail as the length of the class. And here's one for women. We do the same thing, just kind of talk about some of the historical things that happened. Here's one for Asian, what we call the model minority, and just looking at the stereotype, looking at some of the history associated with it, giving the police officer a perspective that I think, unless you spend as much time researching these various issues as someone in our field, they may not know. And we come to find out that we get very good positive feedback from your police officers. They are engaged and they are open to hearing new perspectives. This is one that has grown a lot over the years, individuals with disabilities. We have a lot, and we talk about some of the examples here. We talk about how individuals are actually killed because police officers don't really know. They're looking at an individual as being aggressive, when in fact it could be various reasons, whether they're mental, whether they are just a disability that we may be familiar with, that's causing that person to act in a certain way. We do an exercise that we call the Asian exercise, and basically you have, you know, people have their stereotype of Asian, but this particular video have Asians from all different sectors. They don't even look alike. It just shows people that your stereotype of an Asian is something that don't come in with your assumptions. Look and evaluate that scenario and not evaluate and judge the individual. We also like to look at, like as you can see from here, we go all the way back and look at from the first time immigrants came and how they perceived police and how police actually treated them, which in many cases was not good. We try to educate police officers on this history. And, you know, I don't want to go through everything there, but as you can see, we go back from 1800s all the way up to Dominique White. We try not to skirt issues that are local. We try to make sure that we are addressing those issues. And I think, especially since I live in this community, I get to convey, okay, well, I understand that's what police officers think. Here's what some of the citizens think. And clearly, I can't speak for all citizens, but because of what we do in this community, we interact with a lot of citizens and we're able to share some of the things that we hear. We talk about this police power and authority, and even when police officers don't realize the power they have, especially with certain minority groups, that power and authority is looked at very different than maybe our policy says that it is, and even differently than that police officer is trying to portray at a given time. You know, Dr. Magani is from India, and their perception of law enforcement is very different. As a kid, she grew up, and her mother literally would give her money so that she could, if she got stopped by police officers, she could pay the police officers off, because it was very common in certain parts to actually, for police officers to take a bribe. So just think, when someone from India is encountering our police force, and they grew up with that kind of background, do they see our law enforcement as being fair and equal, or do they see our law enforcement as somebody that's always taking bribes? So just kind of sharing these kind of scenarios with people and the different backgrounds. Use of privilege and authority, and this is just an example we gave that really kind of conveys how, even though you have authority, you also have discretion, and it's up to you to utilize that discretion and authority in a very responsible manner. We talk about some of the negative perceptions of police officers, and just really saying, you know, we're not beating around the bush, but really looking, hey, this is, and we do research, so this is not just based off of what we hear. We do research and find out there's various sources that we can research from that says these are the perceptions that people hold of police officers. And we kind of just share these with the audience, talk about them, get feedback from the audience, those type things. Then, of course, we kind of look at some data related to police officers' perceptions of people, why those perceptions exist, the differences in those perceptions of individuals. The big power brush, these are all examples of incidents where law enforcement encountered individuals, and some of them, like most of you may know about Laquan McDaniel, but these are examples that we believe could have been handled differently, and you may have ended up with different results. And again, it's just about police officers understanding who they're encountering and really using de-escalation in most of these cases to kind of really get the best results you can. And, you know, the stats are that you can't de-escalate everything, but a lot of things that get escalated could have been de-escalated. And we talk about that in the class. And we talk about the police culture of work, because just like any other industry, everybody have their own culture. And many times, people need to be aware of that culture. And oftentimes, when you reflect on your own culture, the standards you have, and it doesn't matter whether you're Irish or American, there's some things you can be very proud about in that particular culture. And really trying to encourage people as a police officer, if you have these high standards and you talk about this good culture, then let's live it and not just talk about it. We have another disability exercise. And this here was just a scenario that we created that's based on a real life situation. An individual with Down syndrome wanted to watch a movie twice. And at the end of the day, he ended up dead because police officers encountered him and started doing things pretty much like their training was when someone is violating the law. He's wanting to watch a movie twice. And so they started handcuffing him and restraining him, and the next thing you knew, he passed. Now, when you think about this at the end of the day, we're talking about a kid who loved law enforcement, and all he wanted to do was watch a movie twice. Is it worth his death? No, it isn't. And we talk about not only the cost to that individual, but we talk about the cost in all of these scenarios to the police officer who is involved, the police department that's involved, and the cost associated with all of these. Like in this particular case, I think there was like 3 different entities that ended up paying a couple of $1 million out of this incident. And of course, the law enforcement officers, their record was messed up. Police department got a bad reputation because in any scenario, killing a disarmed individual with Down syndrome is not some media piece you want out there. It's going to be very hard to justify, especially in a situation where an individual doesn't have a weapon, wasn't attacking anyone, they watch the same movie twice. So we go through all of that. This is an example of that particular case. We talk about perceptions and we do some exercises. And we actually believe that perceptions is really rooted a lot in trust. And it comes down to, can people trust you? This is just one of our examples, and I think this example here, we asked the question when he was the beauty queen. And everybody picked who they thought was the winner of the top left-hand side is actually the person who was the beauty queen. But this person is also born a male. So you kind of get people's eyes to open up and say, well, you know, my stereotype of what things are may not be what it used to be. And so here's an example of this person as they are at the time they took the picture. And then, of course, when he was a young man. So it just shows you the difference. And then this is just who is the terrorist. And of course, to a lot of people, the bottom right hand may seem like the terrorist person, when in fact, you can see who the terrorist is, the bottom left hand corner. Someone who we might look at in our society as being the good old American girl. So really trying to get people to watch their perceptions and not make a lot of assumptions about things, because many times our perceptions can just be wrong. And here's just an example we gave, and this example was just of perceptions in the workplace with law enforcement, a law enforcement environment where an individual was making some comments because someone was elected. And at the end of the day, the perception was wrong, the way the person was treated was wrong. And again, in the classroom, we kind of break this down in groups, give people a chance to kind of talk about it, and then evaluate what they talked about. Then I started looking a little bit closer at the police department and some of their culture, what drives their policies, what they can improve upon, what their response are to concerns when they are raised, whether those are raised by the citizens, the commission, or even employees internally, because employees internally are often very vocal about some things they see that they'd like leadership to address. And we talk about the mission, their statement, and really trying to get people to focus. You know, this is what you say you are about. Are you doing anything that discredits or dishonors the things that you say you are about? And I'll stop here. I hope you got the gist of what we try to convey. We do have, we also, I'll go forward, we talk about some best practices. And that's basically the end of our workshop. We talk a couple of slides about best practices, how to interact with the public. I'll stop and entertain any questions that you all may have with me.
I have some questions. Councilman Killer, I don't know if you have some questions. Can you go back to the first slide where you started at? Because I'll probably have you go back through just, okay, go to the second slide. Okay, now I see that these are good, the code of honors, judge yourself and not others. Why are some of them in red and some of them in black? Are you trying to emphasize to our officers those particular two things?
That's exactly why. Throughout here, you'll see some things in red, and we are trying to emphasize certain things to officers.
Okay.
And that's based in part of, like, judge yourself and not others. Oftentimes, you will get individuals who want to criticize the public, for example, for bringing up an issue. And I would like to challenge people to say, well, let's evaluate, is the public right? Did that officer do something that they should not have done? And then, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I think that's awesome, because you're right, we do tend to, I mean, everybody, we do tend to do that, you know, so I think that is awesome. My next question would be, take one jewel home. What do you mean by that?
If there's one thing that you could take out of the class today, we're just hoping you would take at least one thing that really helps you in your job. Is there something we shared today that really opens your mind to a way of thinking that you could actually become a better police officer? because of what we shared with you.
Do you have them share what they take from your class with with other
Yes,
members?
we actually have, and I can tell you, like I said earlier, your police officers are very responsive. Sometimes we talk about things, especially lately with the death of George Floyd, and we have a presentation of de-escalation where we say you have to hold each other accountable, you have to hold yourself accountable, because you had one officer in Minnesota really negatively affect law enforcement. So let's not let an officer in your department negatively affect your department in the world. So let's hold each other accountable. And so those are the kind of things that we like to discuss with officers. And one, I think your officers are very open to this, but I also think we get some very justified pushback, because there are a lot of things about this whole subject that is subjective. And anytime you're talking about a very subjective subject, you have to be open and facilitate everybody coming to the table with different opinions, and hopefully sharing what you have to share to try to get them to do the right thing at the end of the day.
Kane, you also have on there, do not disturb others, or, others.
Yes,
And that
they-
seems like that would be a given, but can you break that down a little bit?
Yes, for example, I get a phone call, and instead of me getting up and walking out of the room, because we understand with police officers, they could get a call that will require them to leave the room and leave the training altogether. So I don't want people sitting in the room talking on their phone. I want them to get up out of their chair and leave the room, so everybody else can pay attention and participate in the training.
Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? I like how the police history and impact that it's made. I think that's awesome. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, next slide. Next slide. I think that's a very good cultural cycle. Next slide. Next slide.
And the next series of slides really talk about that cultural cycle.
Okay, keep going. Just go real slow. So this one, I don't see color, and I like the comment that you make that applies to you because you are a man of color, and so I really like that. The actions is like touch hair, talk about a person as though they were not present. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Is that the actions that you ask them to take, or is that the actions in the training that they take?
This is one of the things, for example, if a police officer goes to a home and let's say a female has called it and there's a male standing there, and the female doesn't get a chance to talk because the officer is only talking to the male because of some of the cultural things that has happened, and is talking to the male as though the female is not even there.
Okay.
There's cultural blindness to the fact that, one, the female called, two, the female is the person who has the concern, and now she is being totally ignored by the officer.
So a lot of times I've seen them separate, and I've seen one officer talk to one individual and the other officer talk to the other individual. That's kind of the training process then?
And I think that's probably a norm within the police department.
Okay. Next one. Next one. Next one. Next one. Next one. Next one. Next. Go ahead. Next one. 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 I really like this slide as well, because we hear this, how many, all the time. I'm sure our officers hear it all the time. So I really like that you're pointing this out, because I think they need to recognize that, because we hear that a lot. So I appreciate that. Next one, Kane. Next one. Okay, the slide that you just turned it from, you talked about a deaf man, and then you also talked about the mentally ill. I would like to talk about what kind of training are our officers getting for, well, let's talk about the deaf, and then let's go ahead and talk about the mentally ill. What do you talk about? It just breaks my heart when you see the mentally ill and their minds don't click like ours, and they just do something repetitive. Like you talked about the gentleman, he just wanted to go back in and see the show. That was just his goal, and you can't divert from that. And it scares me, because the same touch that can heal them is also the same touch that can harm them. And so I want to know how are we training our officers to kind of pick up on that?
I do know they are doing, the PPD is doing some things in addition to what I'm doing, and I'll share with you what I help.
Okay, so you might have something, Chief.
In
Okay.
addition to the cultural competency training, our firm has also created and they've asked us to do this annually for them. We actually create a panel, and on this panel, we will have someone representing, let's say, the disability community, who's an advocate in the community, and we ask them to share with your law enforcement officers when you encounter someone with a disability, here's some of the things you need to watch out for. And these people are normally experts in the area, so they can break it down and say, well, here's some of the things you need to watch out when you're dealing with the Down syndrome. Here's some of the things you need to watch out when you're dealing with someone with a brain injury. And we also may have someone that's sitting on this panel who is specifically working with people from the veteran community. They're a representative of the VA who is there to talk about, here's some of the things you're dealing with veterans. You have someone from the Black community, someone from the Hispanic community. And you just have these different people, and we're wanting our officers to interact, and it's really, I think, one of the best things we do, where you have someone, and clearly every representative of these communities have their own experience. They may not mirror everything police officers encounter, but what it does do is, in a safe environment, police officers get to ask questions, they get to kind of say, hey, here's my struggle with what you've done, or what I see happening in the community. And I can tell you, the people who participate, panelists, have enjoyed it and asked to come back every time we do it.
Okay, that's
And I do
awesome.
believe the officers get something out of it too.
That's awesome to hear that. And it's awesome to hear that they're being honest with saying, this is my struggle, with that, because that person that's mentally, there's some that looks that they're okay, and they can have just that trigger, so that's awesome.
The third thing we do, which kind of cross into this area, is de-escalation training. And we really have, and that's where Dr. Magana's skills come in. She's a physician, she could talk about some of these various mental things, and we break it down in a way that it's not technical. We kind of talk about, here's when you're dealing with the person with a clear mind, here's when you're dealing with the person with a contaminated mind, and what that looks when a police officer engages and give them recommendations for how things can be de-escalated and what the approach can be given the situation. And we have some very good scenarios that we give them. This is by far the most engaged thing we do with police officers because, you know, we show them a video of someone doing something. It could be something as simple as someone sitting down with a psychologist, and that psychologist is talking to this person, and they could say, well, you know what, this person's mind is contaminated because they're talking like, you know, I'm talking to a clock, I'm talking to an eagle, I'm talking to God, I'm talking to everybody. So we kind of say, so guess what? If they're talking to the clock, they're talking to God, they're talking to an eagle, you're the fourth person they have to interact with.
Yeah.
So that means, and you're probably the last of the four. So you have to be patient and not rush. And in the example we show them, you literally see how this person with a contaminated mind, if you give her time, she could actually converse with you in a very calm, productive way. The psychologist was getting something out of it, and so was this person. And one of the keys to that is, don't be in such a hurry. Use time at your advantage. If you have time to kind of talk with the person, even if it takes you a couple hours, and if that's going to save a life, saving a life is worth a couple of hours. And then we have other videos that and these are scenarios that we literally walk through with officers encountering people who are shooting at officers, people who are threatening to kill officers, and talking about how to de-escalate those scenarios. And officers really talk about some of the tactical things that they see in these videos. And one of the things we always encourage people to do is we ask the senior officers. You know, there are people here who've been on the force less than a couple of years. Let's talk about this issue so you can actually help them see what you see. And that's not just a casual thing. The science says that police officers with experience sees things that these younger officers do not see. And that saves lives, both lives of police officers and lives of the individuals they're dealing with. So it is by far, I think, one of the most interactive things we've done with your department.
Thank you, Kane. Chief, do you want to touch on that right now? Oh, you have a, do you want to touch on, or do you want to touch on that right now?
Which part?
On just what we're doing. He talked about what they're doing with the mentally ill. Do you, I don't know if you guys want to touch on it since we're.
Well, what I can tell you is the Topeka Police Department is leading this field of study and training in the state of Kansas. We go to other agencies and we train them. We put, you know, the thing that you got to understand is there are situations where you don't know the individual has behavioral health issues. And so those become very difficult to deal with. But in the Basic Academy, we receive over 100 hours of dealing with individuals that have behavioral health issues, and that far exceeds what they teach at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. And like I said, we have the CIT program that is head and shoulders above other agencies across the state of Kansas and the United States. And as you're aware, the the governing body approved funding for the crisis responders, which will just excel that even further. So when you talk about this area, one of the things you understand, as I talk about in our training, when we talk about de-escalation, every part of our training includes de-escalation. But you also hear from Mr. Davis here that they hit on dealing with individuals with behavioral health issues as well as de-escalation. And so much of our training overlaps. And so when we say you get 40 hours specifically, that's specifically dealing with that. But you get hundreds of hours every year that cross sections. So when we talk about these particular things, de-escalation training, okay, you may get 16 hours of explicit de-escalation training. But again, when you talk about all the training that we do, you get hours upon hours. The state of Kansas requires 40 hours of in-service training for continuing education. Our officers average over 120 hours, each officer. And so when you talk about training, we do the training. And so that's, I think this is a prime example of that. This training here that Mr. Davis is teaching is new to the agency in the aspect it was brought to our agency after I became the chief. And those are things that the deputy chief, who will be the interim here very soon, is going to carry over. But you see the value in that training. You see what he teaches, he educates. And so, you know, it's great. This is a great partnership we have, and there's a lot of good things that come out of that.
Thank you. Karen, would you like to ask any questions?
I would. Not sure in exactly what order. Let me throw one out to the police department first, then I would like to ask Mr. Davis a few questions. He covered a lot of ground in terms of what even, I remember back when you and I probably started, there were generally 5 classes of minorities identified. I think the list is up to about 12 now in terms of identifying on paper and in policy protected classes. Is your training today, Mr. Davis touched on a lot that you don't always hear these days when somebody's talking about sensitivity training. Do we cover all of those protected classes, not just sex, but sexual orientation, genetic disposition, developmental disabilities, mental health, and so on?
Yeah, we cover the spectrum as we can, but the federal government still only recognizes 5 different races, you know. So,
5?
yeah, the 5 main ones,
Well, the 5 protected classes,
Right.
yeah, race, religion.
yeah. So, yeah, we cover as much as we can in every aspect that we can. And so we also try to focus a lot towards our demographics here in the city, and then be inclusive as a whole. So you also talked about, they hit them upon transgender and how you treat and how you interact with those individuals. A lot of times you don't even know. And so there shouldn't be any difference in how you deal with people. But, you know, when we talk about explicit bias and those type of things, those are what you have to hit on, you have to understand. You know, when we talk about defending people's constitutional rights, I may not like what you're doing, but if it's legal and it's constitutional, that's my duty and responsibility to protect you, to allow you to do that. And those are things that we talk about as well when we talk about dealing with the different classes of individuals.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add to that
Uh-huh.
would be just that
Can you talk to the mic, please, baby?
your diversity of your workforce brings a lot of that in too as well. I mean, the day-to-day experiences and occurrences that occur, that's just one of the many benefits of having a really diverse workforce. So the chief is right in regards to the training and the policies and staying model policy and cutting edge on that. But the diversity of the workforce, I think, is something that's a little harder to quantify. Just
Well, and
wanted to
you
add
all
that.
have worked on that really hard. Could you talk about how we're doing, like, say, from 2015 to 2020 in terms of minority representation on the TPD? Any answer's okay, I know you're working on it.
Hearing aids. Yeah, one of the things that, if you remember when I became the chief, one of the things that I said that we're going to work on that. And I think we've done a very good job on that. Now, we can always do better, but, you know, for example, in the academy that we got going right now, we hired another black female, which is, now we have 2 on the agency, which those 2 individuals were the first hires of black females in a long time. Again, it's not that we didn't recruit them, it's just, you know, applying and staying and going through the process. But one of the things that we've done really well is reaching out to different racial groups in the aspect of trying to recruit from there and recruiting the best officers that we can. And so a lot of that has to do, you know, as the Deputy Chief said, the demographics of our class. If you look at our last 4 academies, they've been extremely diversified. A lot of females have come into the fold as well. And so this latest class that we got, I sent you guys the picture and the roster is very diverse. Extremely excited about the class that we have that's in the field training phase right now. So, yeah, what a diverse workforce brings to you is working with individuals of different races on a daily basis, so you understand, or you get a better image or understanding of what individuals may be going through. Because we're not in their shoes. You can't walk a step in somebody's shoes. Well, everybody says that, you gotta walk in my
try,
shoes,
yeah.
but I can't. I cannot walk in somebody else's shoes, so I need to have better understanding and culture competency when it comes to that.
And if I may, and I want to get back to the presentation, but since we're on this, where are we in terms of percentage of the workforce maybe, and what's the goal?
Well, we could get you those numbers. The goal would be your demographic representation within your community. That would be the goal. And so, but that doesn't mean you just stop once you reach that.
Right.
Okay? Because one of the things that we really need to look at and how do we get there is how do we get more minorities into the command structure? Well, you got to start out just like everybody else, and so they got to work their way up. So the goal is, you got to hire and recruit qualified individuals that also have the desire to want to move up into management. And so, it's not something that happens overnight. We can't say tomorrow, hey, we're going to have, a certain percentage of our command staff's going to be this, this, and this. It doesn't work that way. It's an evolution process. And it's an evolution that probably won't take place in the next 5 years until individuals work their way up into where they can be promoted into those positions.
And I think that's an important point. I mean, this chief in particular, as you guys are all aware,
That chief or that chief?
this chief,
Yeah.
this chief, that chief in particular.
Not the deputy chief.
Yeah, has done a bunch of stuff from recruiting outside of this geographic area and invested the time and the resources. And I think what he's talking about is he's starting to see it, but you may not really see the command structure piece that he's talking about for several years down the road. But it's really a culmination of his vision, and that I'm going to continue on because I see the value of it. But these conversations that Mr. Davis talks about in these training things are being reproduced in cars throughout the city on a daily basis because of the diversity of the workforce that we're doing. And that, like, I agree with the chief 100% on this. That's not something that you ever stop. I mean, you continue to
Right.
try to do it, but a goal is absolutely to try to mirror your community as much as you can. And I think we're on a good path, but it's one of those things, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Right, right.
If I could ask Mr. Davis a couple questions. Could you give some examples? I liked hearing what you were talking about in terms of the exchange with the participants. And I know that TPD does that too. I've sat in on some of that training, but since you're our guest today, could you give a couple of examples of ahas that have, for what you've heard that in those exchanges that made it clear that that training was making a difference?
I think that when you talk about, we share with them what we call the TEB thing, which was TEB table, which was created by a person who happens to be a law enforcement officer, but is also a psychologist. And he created this thing where you look at people's thoughts, emotions, and behavior, and it helps you do a quick assessment of what you're dealing with when you're dealing with an individual. And what it helps with a cop on the street is they quickly ascertain, okay, am I dealing with a person who has a clear mind, even though they may be, moving their hands around and talking loud, are they speaking clear? And what would clear look like? Clear would look like, I want to know why you're giving me this ticket. And if a person is yelling and screaming that and playing, got their hands all up in the air many times, it can be perceived that that person is not clear or that their mind is contaminated, as opposed to a person who is talking to you and saying, you're the FBI and you're the CIA and you've been following me all day. that demonstrates a person who has a contaminated mind. And then once you go from establishing whether an individual has a clear mind or a contaminated mind, you know that, well, if this person has a clear mind, if I'm patient, I can probably just sit back, let them talk, even come up to what we call a communication agreement. Just say something as simple as, okay, Mr. Davis, I'll let you talk, and then if you would let me talk. Because that person has a clear mind, they understand that, you can start communicating in a way that maybe calls or propels you to a quicker solution. As opposed to if the person's mind is contaminated, that's going to be harder to accomplish, because in the example I gave earlier, if that person is talking to 3 or 4 people, it's going to take a while for them to get to you, because these other 3 or 4 people, they have a relationship with them. They know them. And you are that foreign person that they may not even trust at the very beginning. So it's going to take you a while. So I think that has been probably one of the biggest things that have came across with law enforcement. And quite frankly, when we shared it with the participants, I don't remember anyone who had ever seen it or ever heard of that particular metric. So we think that is very good to be bringing that to a law enforcement agency who's never utilized it. And I can bet you, if you were to ask police officers who have taken that, our latest de-escalation class, they walked away knowing the difference between clear and contaminated. And that's a big deal when you're out on the street dealing with someone.
Thank you. And what about the various, you gave us a number of examples of how you do some exercises about cultural differences and understanding. Did those appear to be new experiences for our officers, or ones that they were familiar with already?
I don't think the experiences are new. What I think has been the biggest thing is people get to talk about them when it's not, they're out there in a hostile environment. They're getting to talk about it in the classroom, getting to process it, getting to share, well, you know what, when this happened, this is what I thought of. You know, I didn't even know that. I didn't even think that that was an issue. That never registered to me. And just seeing officers being honest and trying to do their best to wrap their arms around these very complex issues is, I think, is very good. And I know just watching how much of it they have gotten, not just from me, but from CIT and other groups, and the training that they normally do, it's kind of like you're not saturating officers, but by the constant bringing it up, the officers become more proficient at it. It's just like going to the range. You require them to go to the range, they become more proficient. The more this is becoming a part of their culture, the more proficient they're going to become.
And you may not want to answer this, but I'll go ahead and throw it out. Let's call this a safe place. I'm just curious, in terms of your interaction with our classes, and I would assume that a recruit class is different than an annual recertification or annual in-service class. If you were going to rate their cultural competency as a class on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 low, 1 high, or 10 high when they walk in versus how it is when they walk out, do you have a sense?
As opposed to me taking a wide, big gamble, what I can tell you is your agency is smart enough to do after-class review. And the ones I've read were the participants were very receptive, thought the classes were good. And occasionally, I think I've had 1, maybe twice, people thought the class wasn't as good as they would have wanted it to be. And when I say wasn't it good, I just don't think it really is what they wanted to do at that particular time. And The other thing we do is we actually do a question and answer at the end of the class. And we ask, is there anything else we could have done? Since we train we have more than one session, especially in the early sessions, we tell them, we are going to be training your peers. Is there anything else you'd like us to cover? Is there anything we covered that you didn't see of value? We've never gotten an answer that said, that's a bad idea. So I think what we are doing, especially with the feedback from various individuals, has been very positive.
Okay, and that rates your training to some extent, but I guess I don't know that anybody ever knows it all in cultural competency or anything else. I just wondered how ready you thought we were. Again, understanding that everybody's working on it.
The last series of classes, we actually did an in-class post test. And basically what we did was we looked at our training, and at the end, we give 5 questions to see how the class responded. Could they answer those questions to see if they actually were comprehending what we were teaching? And all of that was very good, as far as them knowing what the answer was. And yes, it was a group answer, so I'm not saying 100% of the people knew, but it was refreshing that when we put the question up, you immediately get, at least half of the class responding appropriately. And that was very positive in our mind.
Absolutely, but it also would mean they're learning, which is good. Chief?
Yeah, I think the important thing that we all understand as adults is this training of 4 or 5 hours is not going to change people's opinions about how they feel or whatever. The hopes are that they become more aware of their feelings and how you deal with those when you encounter people of differences. It's cultural awareness.
Yeah, when you talk about, you brought up aha moments and then rating the training, I can say from sitting through the training and kind of witnessing this evolution that's from the beginning of the class to the end of the class. And you sit back and you watch some of, I say younger officers, but really any of the officers in the training. And you see at the beginning of the training, just, kind of soaking it in and taking it in. As the training goes on, the heads are nodding. And then you will physically hear officers responding to the training and making comments like, I didn't even realize that. I didn't even know that I was doing that. I got to do better at that. And I can tell you, I have heard those comments, and those are the aha moments for me. As I keep referring to myself as the older guy, but I can't. But those are the aha moments for me when I sit through those training, and I sit back and I go, they're getting it. And then when you go to rate the training, I don't think that occurs right there in that moment in the classroom. That rating is ongoing because they take what Mr. Kane presents and now they polish it and they practice it and they go back out into our community and they are better. And then they come back for an in-service training and they're more polished and they're more engaged and they're active, as Mr. Kane uses that word a lot in his training, being active.
The 2 biggest ones that I've noticed is people's understanding that not all Latinos are from Mexico.
Boom.
And that not all Asians are Chinese or Japanese. And once you start understanding that and you start realizing that, officers also become more aware of what they're doing. Because one of the biggest ones really is the Latino. Most everybody just
Watch
thinks.
it, watch it, Chief, watch it. I'm right here.
He's walking on eggs.
But, a lot of people, their mindset is, you're from Mexico.
Yeah.
No, we have a lot of, the southern part of countries, here presently now. And so, again, those are two of the biggest ones that I've noticed in just watching the classes. There's always somebody in there that goes, yeah, I didn't think of it that way, because that's not how we're raised for the most part. I mean, we have that narrow vision and mindset dealing with Asians and dealing with Latinos. So those are the big things that I've taken away from just watching classes.
Well, last question that I would throw out to you all as well as Mr. Davis would be, we kind of left off with this issue last time, I think, is what's the best way to follow up and make sure that it's stuck and that we're continuing to make progress?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did send an article.
I know you did.
And that was something that I shared with the command staff, and that's one of the things. I even saw him jot down notes about how do we evaluate, how do we make sure it's better, how do we make sure it's sticking? And those are some difficult things to do, but like I said, I sent you that article, and so that is something that we're working on, and I think the captain had something there.
Yeah, I mean, when we're ready, I have a slide
Okay.
on that we can move to.
We'll wait.
Yeah.
Karen, go ahead and ask Mr. King. Can we get back to that? He has a slide, so can we get back to his slide on that?
Well, or maybe let Mr. Kane answer
Yeah,
that. He's got his whole presentation.
Yeah, that's what I said, yeah.
Oh, sure.
However
That's
you
what I'm saying, can we move
Oh,
on to Mr. King?
you're asking him.
Yeah, if we can wait on him and then go with Mr. Kane, go ahead. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Kane, you're next. I haven't forgot you sitting there. Mr. Kane, you wanna answer Karen's question? Did you get it?
Yes, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I think one of the best ways is when people are in the field, you can track how do we respond to these situations today as opposed to how are we responding to how do we respond to them 3 years ago? And also, as how we incorporating this in other aspects of our training as it relates to, and Chief, I think, did an excellent job talking about how things are intertwined. How is it being intertwined and used in our training environment when that's really not the key subject? And when I say that, I'm talking about, for example, if we are talking about tactics and someone is bringing in the things that they learned in de-escalation, that's like a home run, because you now start seeing how all of these things are intertwined, they're not interdependent, they work hand in hand. And of course, in addition to the data of looking at where we were and where we are that I spoke of earlier, you also have the ability to start tracking that through how we phrase our end of training questions to the staff to find out what really did it. And you can do that, and I think it's best to do it 3 months out so that you can actually say, okay, you had the training 3 months ago. Have you used that training in the field since you had the training?
Thank you. Thank you.
You good, Karen? Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Padilla. Mike, if you can get off mute and
Yeah, just waiting my turn.
wake up.
I've got several things I'd like to touch on if I could.
Okay.
I don't want to bog it down, but there's a couple things I want to ask a little more detail on and make some comment on as well. And I appreciate Mr. Davis being with us today. I've talked with him, I've sat in on some of his class and plan on doing more. I like his approach to his topics. Over the years, I've seen him taught by a number of presenters. I think the department also enjoys a good training staff that supplements Mr. Davis's efforts. And by just looking at that staff, you can see the diversity that it already has expanded in the department. One of the slides that you showed, Mr. Davis, that the chairwoman had you stop on, had as a bullet point stereotypes about police officers as great communicators. And I think that's making the assumption that policemen or policewomen are good communicators. Am I correct? Is that what that bullet point was, to imply that police officers in general are good communicators?
Yes, and I think we got that off of one of the Pew Research data sets that we use.
Yeah. My observation is that I've seen officers and worked with officers who were exactly that, great communicators. I've seen officers also who I wondered why they ever got into the job to begin with, because times they would tell me, I just don't like talking with people, which seems totally contrary to the basic work of law enforcement. And I know that there are still people out there who get nervous about communicating, small groups, large groups. And that maybe this isn't that specific topic that you addressed during your cultural training, but I know the chief and Captain Holcomb could address it. How much time is devoted to developing that as a skill for officers? Because unless they're able to communicate their intent, their purpose with the community in an effective way, I think that kind of makes us stumble on everything that you're trying to do. So can you give me an idea, someone, about how much time is devoted to developing that skill of communication? Anybody?
Yeah, I don't know if I could put a quantitative number on that, but I do know that the academy is now structured to where communication is one of those things that is mandatory. It's not like when, I know when I went through it, but like when you went through it, where you sat there and you went to class basically and you didn't say anything or whatever. That's totally reversed now, and I think, Mr. Davis even hit on it where the officers even communicate, talk, and participate. So the whole model of getting them to communicate, talk, and feel more comfortable, talking to people is one of the things that we work on. As you know, we live in a generation now where if we could work calls over text message, we'd probably be really, really successful at the younger officer level. But we can't work domestic violence calls that way. So those are one of the things that we have constantly talked about over the last 5 years. How does that work? And as you know, the training staff, they become very engaging with the academy and getting them to participate. You got anything?
I would add to you that the whole training has changed in regards to that. A lot of things have moved more to scenario-based training, Mike, and one of the things that we do, not just the tactical analysis after action, after the scenario is over, but there's also an analysis that's done about how you communicate it in there. So I think it's really in every piece of the academy and the training across the board. I agree with the chief, it's hard to say a specific number of hours, but everything that we do now is so scenario-based, from domestic violence calls to disturbances to anything else. And there's a critique of the communication piece of that, as well as the tactics as well, that I think is somewhat newer and different than was in the past. That would be my answer.
Yeah.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I wasn't really looking for an exact number. I do think that the idea that, when you self-evaluate or critique, you can ask yourself the question, what did I say and what did I mean and what did they hear? Because I think that's a way to evaluate how good your communication is in scenarios. Jamie, Captain Holton, did I cut you off?
No, I've been that
This came
person
David.
that's given the critiques at the end of the scenario-based training, did that for years. And the deputy chief's absolutely right on that, that part of it is those critiques when the officers go through that scenario and they've performed whatever it is they're going to perform, and we let them step out, cool down for a minute, whatever, we bring them back in, and oftentimes we started that critique was, do you remember what the first thing you said during that scenario was? Do you remember what the first words out of your mouth were? Do you remember how you said that? And so we talk about communication during those critiques very heavily, maybe even more than even the tactics like the chief and the deputy chief are talking about. But I think it's very much like we've talked about de-escalation, how that's intertwined into so many things, if not almost everything that we are training on. That communication piece is very much intertwined also from specific classes, the tactical communication class in the academy, right down to defensive tactics and talking to individuals and giving clear direction and professional language and things. It's intertwined into everything that we do.
Well, I appreciate that, and I would agree with you. Like the chief says about text messages, I know even in this day and age, when people send an email, if they send it with exclamation points or all cap letters, or in some way the recipient of that email reads into that message something that very likely wasn't intended most of the time. But I know that, and we talked about this last time we met, is when you first come into a situation, that first response, that first communication that the officer brings can really set a tone. And I really like the idea that not just the awareness that we've spoken of, but and how to convey that to the citizens when officers are interacting at a situation so that they're clear about their intent to assist and to take care of a problem rather than to maybe take control immediately without an initial evaluation of what's going on. So I appreciate that. And Sheriff, you could indulge me. I have another thing I'd like to ask.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I saw something in the presentation, and I heard it in the conversation, the Topeka Police Department's Cultural Competency Champions. What is that idea, and who is that? Is that command? Is that rank and file, or a combination of both? Anybody? I think Mr. Davis may have alluded to that term in a sense.
In my presentation, when we talk about that, one of the things that we are looking at is how is cultural competency exhibited throughout the organization. And it can be, ideally, it's from the leadership, because if people realize that leadership is bought into it, it's a whole lot easier for rank and file to buy into it. But even one of the things we talk about is, even with your peer, if you have two officers riding together, who's going to be the champion? Who's going to, when they go to a call together, do we know who has the strength to really make this a good experience for that person in the public and for the officer? And it's just about knowing who is good at it and then learning from those individuals so that group of people who are good at it actually grows over a period of time. Because you said something that we always hit up in our class, is you can Google and you'll see many times when officers have things under control and the officer comes in at the last minute and he or she kind of turns things upside down because of the way they're communicating, because of their aggressive nature. When in fact you have 4 officers there, they're already talking to the person, they already have a plan that they're executing, and one person can turn it upside down with their aggressive behavior. And I tell people all the time, well, if you got 4 officers there, they've probably done all the safety protocols that need to be done, and we're showing up in one person follow somebody's lead. But that's not the case now. Again, you can see it on numerous videos.
Well, I appreciate that. And, and I think for me, I'd like to see some way. I know we talked a little bit about how do we evaluate if this training is sticking, if it's, staying with the officers, that there's some way to acknowledge the importance of that championship of that kind of ethical way to deliver professional services. You know, and there are role models both in the rank and file and in the command structure. So at times, if I might suggest, you don't have to do it, obviously, is that when we're giving recognition to officers' achievements within the department, that those officers who have been outstanding in displaying that kind of approach to problem solving in our community, with all the training that they're being given, that they're given some kind of a department nod or a pat on the back, because I think it's important, along with every other skill that they develop and reinforce throughout their career. So that's just a comment I'd like to make. And I wonder, Mr. Davis, when you're talking about working with the recruits, and you're talking about scenarios or talking about situations, and I think Councilwoman Hiller asked if these were new for some of the recruits. Do you get a sense that some of the recruits, when they've come into this training now, that they are becoming, at the very beginning, more self-aware of things that in the past that they didn't really give consideration to, and now that they're going into a job and a profession that requires this to be a skill and an effective skill? You see that in a lot of the recruits, that some of this is like, well, now this, before I became a cadet for police academy, I would have never looked at this situation with these glasses. Now I'm looking at them more carefully and differently and thinking about it. Is that kind of reaction coming because of the training you're providing and the direction the department is giving them?
Well, I would tell you, I can't take credit for it, but the department and the employees, the new recruits, come, I think, a lot more open than I've seen over my years. And to give you an example, one of the best examples of where I'm continuing to learn, once we did a cultural competency panel where I brought in people from various sectors, disability, Black, Hispanic, whatever. And at the end of the presentation, one of the recruits, this is a person who's not an officer, he's in training, he comes to me and says, you know, I never thought about this before. Well, could you have someone on this panel who's had to deal with foster kids? And he said just seeing these different things made him think, I was a foster kid, and we are so misunderstood. And of course, our next panel, we had someone representing foster kids on that panel. So I love the fact that, and I think that we learn from each other, and like I said previously, in this cultural competency circle, we keep learning as we want to learn. And that young man really brought some insight to me that, quite frankly, I had never done that before. And I see the value of it. And we'll continue to look for other opportunities to bring in new things based on what the community is dealing with.
Well, thank you. And my questions come because I don't want to make this an examination of everything that is being done with regards to training, because I have a good understanding, but I want the community to hear those things from you as one of the trainers, from the chief as the department head, because that's the first thing that I read when I get emails and so forth, is criticism about, well, all the officers need more training. But the training they're getting is very good, and I want people to know that in every detail as much as possible. And that's why I ask some of these things, because I don't just want them to know that they get trained in certain topics and it's kind of a glossed over piece. I want them to understand how all of this training meshes together to form what is a professional organization that provides services fairly to others and with every consideration, and look closely enough that if that doesn't happen, that there needs to be some change. But as long as we're doing as much as possible and continuing to adapt, I think I am glad to hear a testimony and that from the staff so that everybody can hear what is being trained for our officers. Thank you all. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. I'm glad we got to wake you up there. I know you're awful comfortable at home there, but I'm glad you got.
Got my sweater on.
I need mine. Mr. Davis, you talked about foster care, and that brought something else up to me. I know we have pathways for our youth out there. Are there officers, or have you guys talked about officers pertaining to those children that can range anywhere from 5 to 18 years old? And the issue.
No, ma'am, I have not specifically talked to any officers about it.
Okay, have we done anything with that, Chief? Because again, I've been studying trauma, so this is why it's very important to me. And I know one time I was there and some officers showed up and there was a young lady having, again, a crisis. And we've just gotta get in tune, not be threatening to them, but just get in tune with what they're going through. And I realize when it comes to that point that officers are called, it might be a little bit, but they had her outside, away. Again, I'm glad to hear that. We can't emphasize it enough, just the time, to let them kind of wind down, to let them kind of, time has to be on our side, so.
Yeah, I think that's a population that we need to do some more work on. I'm on the CASA Board of Directors, and we have had CASA come in and talk to all the roll calls and stuff like that. But I think we need probably a little bit more.
But I think CASA is more for your court-appointed, special.
Right, but they deal with a lot of kids who suffer a lot of the same trauma
Right,
and
right,
who
right,
are in the
okay.
foster care system. And so I think that that's probably one area. Really, I think one of the things that we don't understand or we don't take into perspective is the trauma that the young people, that a lot of them that are in the
Yep.
foster care system.
Yep,
We do trauma-informed care. We've done some training in that in the past. It's probably time to do some more of that. We partnership with Wichita State University, and they came up and they done 4-hour block a couple years back on trauma-informed care, but that's probably another topic. And we do touch on that in a CIT training, but it's not in depth. But it's probably time again for us to explore that.
I'm glad to see you write that down, because I think that's very, very important now with this time and age and with what goes on, with those children, that they go through so much. I'm gonna share something with you. A young man that met, I wanna call him Jason Jones. He was one of our bicycle cops. Jason, is that his last name, Jones?
Luke Jones.
Luke Jones, okay. And this young man was, having problems with putting his seatbelt on, didn't want to do it, jumping all around the car. Jason, I call him, right, Luke. I thought it was Jason. No? Anyway, and he works at the library too. Anyway, he talked to him and told him, he did it in a loving way and told him, I care about you. And he spent like 15 minutes with them. To this day, the young man puts his seatbelt on. That's all it took, was him to say, I care about you. This is why we do it. Now, parents can say it all they want to, but that's what he needed to hear from him. And we've seen him at the library as well, and he'll ask him. He tells him, I've been wearing my seatbelt. And it's just that kind of relationship that we've got to build with these trauma kids. So when they see us, they don't think that we're there to force them or manhandle them or to that understand. Anyway, that's another subject. So, Mr. Kane, do you have anything else to add?
No, I don't. I want to thank you all for giving me an opportunity to share with um, what we provide for the department. And the last thing, I guess I do, but one of the last things, we talked about communication. And we provide in like our de-escalation classes, there are 2 sections in there that specifically talk about communication. And the reason we do is because we know communication is always going to be a problem. As someone who's led organizations with over 10,000 people in one of the organizations, I can tell you, no matter what exercise we did, we had to talk about where we failed with communications. So I do consider communication to be a big part. We actually talk about active listening. We talk about crisis communication. We talk about body language, tone. It's the whole broad spectrum in what we think police officers will have to deal with. So thank you again for giving us a chance to talk about our.
Well, thank you, Mr. Davis, for taking your time out. I want you to know, as the chair, I really appreciate you being with us and your presentation. And I will be calling on you again, I'm sure.
Yes, ma'am.
But we do appreciate all that you do.
And I can tell you, there are other departments that are not reaching out and trying to do the things that your department is doing. And I think it really speaks volumes about the intent of your leadership team as it relates to cultural competency, diversity, those type items.
Mr. Davis,
So
you
thank
kind
you.
of cut out. Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
I was just stating that it speaks volumes to me as a professional in this area, where that your department is actually doing so much in the area of diversity, cultural competency, and de-escalation, because there's a lot of departments not doing it. So thank you.
Well, we want to be the best we can be, and we're glad you're on our team.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.
Thank you. Okay, so we haven't even started this yet. You said you had a slide. You want to start with that?
Yeah, we can put that
Okay.
up there. And if you want to go to just past the title slide to the first slide. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, in going back to the article we were talking about that the chief sent out, he regularly sends us literature to read and kind of challenges our minds a little bit as far as that goes. But the article that he recently sent out about training and does it stick, and that's kind of a topic we brought up a little bit ago. In reading that article, there were 3 main prongs or tests in there for establishing if your training program is effective or not. And those 3 things identified in the article were testing, demonstration, and compliance. And so after reading that article, I kind of stopped and took a pause, and I wanted to go through each one of those prongs and kind of place it against what we do and come up with some examples, and it really took me about 2 minutes. The testing phase, though, obviously we have regular exams in the academy. We have post-tests for various in-service topics. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with, we push out a lot of policy and lessons on our, to the department through Power DMS on a very regular basis, updates to policy, you name it, we can push it out very quickly and effectively through Power DMS. But some of those lessons also contain quizzes at the end.
What is Power DMS?
Power DMS is basically the software that we use that contains all of our policies.
Okay.
And it's how we update them. It's how we push them out to the officers. I think I mentioned in our second meeting that officers are required to read and sign, and that's acknowledging that they've read and understand each policy. And that is that's how we push that out to the officers in the electronic format. And that's how we track that every officer has received that policy, has read that policy, and understands that policy. And then we can also push out training videos, and it's just a very effective tool to push out a lot of information efficiently.
So are you saying, if I may, real quick, are you saying they have to go in, read those policies, and then sign off that they've read it, and then you get it back? Is that what that is?
Yes, so they will receive a email in their inbox that there's a new policy, a update to a policy, a change to a policy, and then that is also, that's tracked when they log into Power DMS, when they sign into it, when they've put their electronic signature on it, and then we can go back and run a report on that. Okay, these 5 officers still haven't signed for that timely manner. Why is that? Okay, well, they were on vacation, whatever. You know, as a commander, then I'll send out an email saying, hey, you need to get in there and read and acknowledge that policy. So it's a great tracking mechanism.
Yeah, Power DMS is a policy management system. And so you can put training and all that other stuff. So like that article that I sent you on, I Can't Breathe. Those 2 articles we put on Power DMS, made the officers have to sign for that, which means they open up, read it, and then they sign that they had got that article and read it. So we can do numerous things with Power DMS.
Just devil's advocate for the moment, kind of along the lines of whenever you open up something and you have to check the box that says, I agree to these rules before you can proceed with ordering your product or watching your video or whatever, using a picture. I mean, they can just check it off.
Well, they can, but like if you put a video on there, you have to watch the entire video.
Got it.
Nothing is fail-proof.
No, I'm just
And
checking,
so it
because we were talking about following up to make sure it's stuck
Yeah.
from last time.
But
and
see,
this
like
time, so-
policies are put on Power DMS because we have tons of policy.
Right.
And so I can tell you, I had a policy binder, 2 binders that I threw in the trunk of my car, and they rode in the trunk of my car for 10 years. Never looked at them, right? This, with Power DMS, it's right there. So anytime they have a question, they can go to the policy. Anytime, 24 hours a day, it's on the computers, it's on the MDTs. So we can push out training to everybody at any given time, so.
And I think, with all due respect to the old binder, you can actually word search this. So if you have an officer who's on the street or a supervisor who's on the street and they're looking for a particular category, to go, hey, what's the policy on this? They can access it right then, and it'll word search down to where it's at. It helps them go through the policies and sort through the stuff too. And as the captain mentioned, there's a lot of these that have proficiency tests on them, so they have to take the test.
Okay.
So, I mean, you have to have some knowledge of what's in there to have taken the test. And all of that is an accountability piece that we can present to the council and anybody else that asks for data on.
So
any
do they
particular
get a
policy.
certificate at the end, like they have to make so many, like a test, so many out of so many?
Well, they don't get a certificate, but it does track whether they passed. There are standards that are set for those tests, yeah.
The electronic signature on those cases is not an option until you've taken the quiz and passed the quiz, so.
Awesome.
There's just a few examples of the testing prong there, and then demonstration, a few obvious ones. Defensive tactics, skills checks, firearms proficiency, emergency vehicle operations. Those are all examples of skill sets that require a demonstration piece to it. And then compliance was the 3rd prong mentioned in that article. So how do we know that the officers are getting it, so to speak? How do we know that they're following it? And those are followed up through with annual evaluations that we've talked about, the quarterly feedback sessions, and goals that we've talked about. And then there's, the mechanism built in with the EAIP as well, the early intervention program, which can track certain triggers like sick time use or citizen complaints or use of force incidents or vehicle pursuits. So we can track those incidents, in a sense, compliance, in a way through the EAIP as well. So just a few examples. I thought that article was very timely, so.
I think the chief did too. 'cause
I
was
think
like-
so. I think that's,
He was like, whoa, thank you for being honest.
I think that's why he told me to read that.
Yeah, I was like, let me read this again, because I was like, am I reading what I'm reading? So, okay. We have about, we have about 15 minutes left. I guess we can continue on. Relevant topics, let's do that. We'll just keep going, if you
Sure.
don't mind. We'll see where we're at.
Yeah, and this was just kind of to, I don't want to say wrap up our discussion on training, because I don't know that we can ever wrap that up. But I just wanted to point out that the ongoing training that we've talked about a lot is not this repetitive cookie cutter thing that we push out on an annual basis. We're constantly changing it and looking for topics that are relevant, that are current events. So this was just an example that I wanted everybody to see that we had in our last defensive tactics in service early this fall. We put on, our defensive tactics instructors put us through a course on called One Breath, the importance of recognizing agonal and other breathing problems. I just threw up a couple snippets of the slides that were on that. And this course, it was about an hour and a half long. And at the end of that, we were required to take a written exam as well. So just pointing out that the training that we're providing is not a cookie cutter version, and that we're really looking for topics that are important to us now.
And it almost has to change,
It-
because
it
times
absolutely has
change.
to.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
I mean, we can't still go back to that. So I'm glad to hear that. I mean, because times definitely are changing. And, you know, our city has changed. When we used to have a state hospital, now we don't have a state hospital. When we've got the mentally ill, you know. So I'm glad to hear that. Chief?
Yeah, that's one of the things that, I stated early on. Police reform is the catch term right now that's going on, but our agency is constantly in police reform. We constantly, just like the captain said, looking at stuff. So when people say we need police reform, that does not scare me at all, because that just means, hey, we're already doing a lot of these things, and we're going to continue to do it going into the future. That's how our agency is. So police reform is the norm for us.
I think, Chief, to be honest with you, I think when we say police reform, we've got to get on the same definition, because I think there's so many people out there that have so many definitions, and some of their definitions are scary, some of them don't know, they're just saying, repeating after what everybody else is saying. And I think that's something that I really want to get on the definitions. I don't know what meeting, but we've got to get on the same page of what we're talking about, because citizens will say, well, you've said that, but you didn't do that. And so that's how I know that their definition is not the same as ours. Okay. I want to go back just a little bit, I'm sorry, to the Power DMS Policy Management Program. Can you, I'm sorry, Karen, if an officer didn't take it, does that alert you? Like, do they have a cutoff date, like, let's say a month? And then if he doesn't do it, then you go to him, or he gets another email?
Yes.
Oh, okay, and so what if he doesn't take it within the other month? Is there a point where he gets written up? Is it-
Corrective
Yes.
action.
Huh?
Corrective action.
Corrective action, so, okay.
They're only smiling because that's something that I take very seriously, and I'm usually the one that
I
pushes.
can't see the smile, so
Yeah.
I can see them eyes. So
I can read the body language from over here, so, and I think that's why he was doing it, because it's usually an email that comes out from me that reminds the commanders once the deadline is passed, and I can assure you, we take that very seriously.
Okay, because I know that might be a question. So then in the corrective action, will they be disciplined, like take it? No,
Yes.
I mean, yeah, corrective action, could that be like, they would won't be able to go back into the field or
Go ahead.
written up, or what?
Yeah,
would
it's
be-
written up as the short answer to that. As a starting step, the first step is progressive, through the collective bargaining agreement. So the first step generally for something like we're talking about here, a policy violation, would just be a write-up. And then obviously you would expect that they would then correct it. And if you had an additional violation of that same type of corrective action, so I don't write this policy up in this period of time and I get written up, and then a month later I miss another deadline with policy, then you could get the second step up from the progressive action at that point. So it
Okay.
does build at some point, and it could result in a suspension day or something if it got far enough down the chain. But the first step is usually a write-up.
So there's no way around it, other than being fired, basically.
Oh, you could get it to that point. Luckily, we haven't.
No,
done
I'm
that.
just saying, so.
could.
Because I want to I want the citizens to know that they have to read through that.
Yep.
They have to. Okay.
Absolutely.
Usually only takes once.
Yeah, we don't have a tremendous amount of repeats once they realize that the accountability piece is there from the command, that we are reinforcing this, that this is not something we just say, but this is something that we do, and we expect it to be complied with, and there's repercussions in the adult world if it's not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you'll even see that come from the lower levels of supervision too, where there's been a series of things come out on powered EMS, and a sergeant or lieutenant will be mindful of that, and he or she'll send out an email to his group or her group of officers that say, hey, there's been a lot of stuff come out on powered EMS. Make sure, foot stomp, make sure that you are signing and reading and signing for those documents. So those reminders come at various levels and in various forms. So,
I mean, operating within our policy and our training provides the best protection for the officers and for the city. So it's something that we take, as you can tell from the three of us, very seriously. And I think that that's always been a pretty serious piece from the command structure.
Yeah, you guys have almost jumped in the middle there. All three of you almost flipped over the table there. Did you see that, Karen? I was like, whoa, what did I say?
I can catch the eye contact right here.
Okay, you got a different angle there. But I see him like, whoa. Okay, I just want to make sure, because if somebody asks me that, I want to make sure that
I'm a very big proponent, as you can tell, of
Right.
powered EMS, and from day to day, I usually am the one that's taking care of it because it's part of the daily operations. But I'm a very big fan of the accountability piece of it, because we can very much drill down and see who's doing what and who's not doing what as it pertains to those categories and stuff. So it's a really big advantage to us
Yeah,
that
it's a
that
great
past
tool.
that
Mhm.
past police management really haven't had. So I'm a big fan of it.
Okay. Is there anything that, sorry. Let's pick up my grandson time. Is there anything that, that we have in position, like, I know my neighbors. I know that such and such, he's harmless, but he's mentally ill. Is there anything, and somebody asked me this, is there anything in the records or when he gets called to that address that flags that? The fire department, they have that you could fill out a form and stuff like that. Is there anything with the officers?
Yeah, what we can do with the dispatching system, if there's a address or an individual that we deal with constantly, they are entered in there, and so that name comes up. But we also have a program where you can register if you have a person that lives with you that has behavioral health issues or a substance abuse issue, either or, so that when you call and we get sent to that address, the officers are aware of things prior to getting over there. And the hopes of that program is that if we're aware that somebody may be schizophrenic, then we should be expecting unusual behavior. And it shouldn't catch us by off guard when we encounter those individuals. But yeah, we have those programs and.
What's the name of the program, Chief?
I knew you were going to ask me that. It's slipping my mind right now, but
Okay.
it's actually a program that I instituted. That's why I feel kind of embarrassed on
That's
that.
why-
that I-
Well, they should know it.
It's a, house watch is what we put in dispatch, but,
Right.
yeah.
Can you come back and get that back to me?
Well, we do have the Take Me Home program is one who deals with individuals who have Alzheimer's and dementia.
Take Me
or
Home?
Take Me Home program. And that's for individuals who have Alzheimer's or dementia. But it also is for younger people who don't have the ability to communicate. That if they get lost or they wander away from home. So you could put in there like for autistic children. For some reason, water is one of the things that is attractive to autistic children. And so, if you put in there that your child's autistic, and say you live close to Sixth and Gage, the duck ponds that they have there, that, hey, that'd be one of the first areas we go check if that child comes missing. So,
Well, you are not allowed to quit until you give me that information, since you brought it up and you can't remember. No, I'd really like to have it. I've never heard of that before. And I think to help, our constituents want to help you guys. And I think this is a great program that somewhere along the line, I'm talking to you, we need to blast it out there to get.
And I do think it's important to know that the House Watch system that we talk about, that can be any kind of information that we respond to repetitive calls at the house for. Anything from this is somebody that gets arrested a lot to this is somebody that needs special assistance, this is somebody that is hearing impaired. So it can cover all of those things
Okay.
as well as individual programs, but there is a specific individual program.
Yeah,
that
if
he's
if we could do that, that would be great to help you on different addresses.
That's very much a fan that police officers who respond are, because we like as much information
Right.
as we can get before we get there.
Right.
So we can kind of figure out how we need to approach it, and Captain Halton will tell you, he's the tactical guy, that there's more information you get before you even are on scene,
Right.
the better off you are.
Right.
So Liz is on top of her game. She just sent me a text. Behavioral health premise alert.
Do you have any information on it?
Yeah, it's also on our website too, but I'll send you guys the link so you can look at
That
it.
would be great, Chief. You really want to get out of here, that'd be great. Karen?
Thank you. If I can ask what can be a short question about House Watch, I guess it'll be a future session where we talk about profiling and prejudgment or whatever, but police, Chief and I have had a couple of my constituents where maybe it's because of House Watch, but is there extra training that goes into a de-escalation type training when you've got somebody who is proven to be a difficult person to work with? I've got a couple people who are harmless. They really have never harmed anyone that I know of. Well, one of them, one exception. But the officers have showed up expecting trouble and have escalated situations instead of de-escalated. And it was clearly because of pre-information about this individual, because I ended up getting dragged into the situations. The officers didn't even know the people, but came with having gotten information from the station about them, expecting that it was going to be a difficult encounter. So is there extra, Chief and I have had this conversation that every day should be a new day, no matter who it is, just based on those experiences that I've had. And I'm not talking about racial necessarily in these instances that I'm thinking about, but is there extra training for somebody who has a history with the department of any sort to work on de-escalation?
Well, again, as we talk about de-escalation, we've talked about that a lot. There's no specific training in what you do with the information that you receive. The whole idea behind the premise alerts that we have in dispatch is to hopefully facilitate a more positive outcome
I understand that.
on the call. And so the more information that the officer has upon arrival at the scene, the better prepared hopefully they are to deal with the situation and do a positive outcome. Because officers don't go to a call with the hopes that they're going to get into a fight, okay? They don't want to escalate the situation. The problem that you run into is sometimes you deal with these individuals so often that unfortunately, human nature does kick in, and sometimes that happens. But for the most part, I doubt our officers show up and antagonize the situation to make it worse. Something happens when they get there, and having that prior knowledge may feed into that. Because if they do something, if a person reacts a certain way, then they're anticipating, oh, here we go. But the premise alerts, the whole purpose is to provide a safer environment for everybody involved, not just the officers, but to the call,
right.
the people that responded
That's
to.
right. That's right.
Maybe we could talk about that more in
Yeah.
a future conversation, but I think it's a key to some concerns that people have on the street as well, that,
Well, I think in some of that regards too, I mean, like the CIT program's a great example for that. It's knowing the right resources to send. That's the same kind of decision that information is based on too. So I wouldn't necessarily leap to that it's a negative connotation. I think the chief's right. You're trying to get the best resources and the best. You talked about the officer that made a connection with the child. If we knew that going in, that there was a specific officer, which I can tell you from the real world, it absolutely happens when you work the same territories with the same people. Some officers click better with some citizens than not. And if you
Right.
know that going in, that this is the
Right.
problem, then you can, so I think it's right. The information gives you the best attempt to get the best result, is what I would say.
Yeah, and that's something that, you know, I talked about, I think in our second meeting, we were talking about de-escalation, the class that we used to teach, and that whole decision-making model and having that information in your back pocket before you even get there. And you start assessing what needs, what resources I may need before I even get there.
Right,
To
I
set
remember.
myself up for success. And like I said, the quote from the class is, am I the right tool for the job? Am I the right person for this job? Is there somebody better or another resource that we have? And it boils down as simply, sometimes you'll hear an officer dispatched to a call. The dispatch will provide the house watch to that officer, whatever the scenario may be. And then you'll hear another officer get on the radio who wasn't even dispatched to that call, who said, hey, I was there last week. I had a pretty good rapport with that person. Would you like me to
that's good to know.
respond and accompany you on that call? And of course, am I the right tool for the job? You know, come on over. Let's do this successfully. So.
Well, I think that'd be helpful. Obviously, as council people and as this committee, we're here because of the ones that didn't go well. Those are the ones we hear about. And so part of this process, to me, is getting that in context with what the total is, but also in a safe way, hopefully being able to talk through that combination of training, consequences, supervision, how we make those tough situations better, because it can be behavioral like the ones I'm thinking of that right off the top of my head, but it can also be racial, cultural, who you're running with, those things that have built up to people feeling like perhaps they've been profiled in some way. And so when we're ready, let's go
Yep.
back to that anyway.
Yep. I think, council members, if I'll ask you to look at December the 28th. If you'll look at your calendar, Mr. Padilla, as well, December 28th at 3 o'clock, is that going to, what'd you say?
That sounds great to me.
Why is that?
His last day is the 23rd.
No, you're required to be here on the 28th.
I don't know if, I'll be gone during that week, but
Will
I don't
you
know
be
if
gone?
I can have a stand-in or however we want to accomplish that, so.
If that's not gonna work, we can move it up just so the damn chief can be here. That's what I'm gonna do.
Send him out with, in style, right? Meetings
Right.
all day, every day.
He'll thank me for that.
I tell you what, I'm sure it does for you. What about, what about the 14th? Do you guys have anything on the 14th?
I already have 3 meetings on the 14th.
On the 14th, the 21st, will it?
21st is okay.
21st? Chief, will you be here on the 21st?
Yes, ma'am, I'll be here.
Mike,
City
yes?
manager says I'll be here.
Yes?
We actually have a Public Works Infrastructure Committee meeting at 2 o'clock on the 21st.
Okay, let's do this. What about Thursday, the 31st? Does that work for you? Will you be back?
New Year's Eve?
Oh, Jesus, okay.
No, I'm gone that whole week,
It's my birthday
Okay,
anyway. Shouldn't have to go to a meeting.
Let's see.
January 4th.
No, we're gonna, I wanna have a.
What about the,
January
what about the morning of the 21st?
Well, I don't wanna do that to you, Karen, if you got 3, is that what you said?
Oh, no, that's the week before.
The 14th?
Yeah,
What about the 21st?
yeah.
Liz,
That's
we
what
did-
Liz, the 2 o'clock in the
Liz?
afternoon.
well, there's another meeting on the 21st?
Let me look here real quick. I was pulling up another date. The 21st,
The chief really wants to be here.
How about,
are you talking about in the morning on the 21st?
We can do a morning if we need to.
Yeah, the 21st is just the Public Works Infrastructure at 2 o'clock.
Okay, do you have anything at 11?
27th
No, or
through the 31st.
10?
Gone.
10?
I do not.
Mike, can you do the 21st at 10?
I can look at it, depending on what the travel conditions are then, I might not be here. What about Thursday, the 17th of December?
Dr. Bazino said you're to stay home. That's another thing. He said you're not to be traveling. Where the heck are you trying to go? The 17th?
17th is good for me because everybody else
17th is good
canceled.
for me too. What do you got, Liz?
So Classroom A is not available, but it looks like the Holiday Building is available for
Okay,
that.
we'll do it there. On the 17th
Yep,
at 3 o'clock?
yes.
Okay, 17th, good for everybody? That's okay.
Come with a pile of files for us?
17th, Liz.
Thought so.
And
Okay.
Okay, and I'll talk to you about the agenda. City manager, would you like to add anything? Anybody else that's in the room, would you like to add anything before I adjourn the meeting? I think it's, I just
Attorney
wanna-
Jones did come with a bunch of files, so.
Well, we're out of time here, so he's gonna have to come
I'm
back,
just
I'm
gonna
sorry.
be real quick. I think, the key that I like today is we had the discussion is looking at how we're using external sources to help train, how those have been indoctrinated and how that's been well accepted and has made additions to how we've done our training in the past. And how they've embraced it. I also think that the ensuring through the system that our officers are reviewing the policies and having to sign off on them. Because the first thing is if they don't know about the policy change,
Can't do
they
nothing.
can't implement it. And that's something through this system ensures that as management, they've at least been exposed to it. And I think then the next step is that those frontline sergeants and lieutenants are asking to ensure that the officers, did they have questions about it? Yes, you read it, but do you understand it as to what's being asked? And I think as we've been going through a number of things as it relates to how we interact with the public regarding COVID, we were like, you didn't have to wear a mask. Now it might have, we're going to have to. As these things have evolved, that has been important that we have those kind of a systems in place. And so it was good to hear us talk about that today to show some of the things that we're doing to try to make sure that our staff is well aware of what we want them to do when they're out there doing their job.
Yep, I agree. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? Chief, we'll see you next month, right? I wouldn't care if you're a citizen. I expect you to put that on your calendar. Anybody else before we,
Matt, you have anything?
anybody else before we leave? Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Where's your last day?
Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
safe.
Where's your last day?